Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you this hour as another episode. The Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. Edward starts us off from Connecticut. Hey, Edward, welcome into the show program.
Hi, Noah. Hey, I've got a question about how to monitor bandwidth that you're using while tethering.
It's a good idea. You should do it.
Yeah, totally, because it's not unlimited. So I've got an X220 running Ubuntu 18.04, and I connect it via USB to my phone. That's my tethering process. And most days I'll use like maybe 50 megabytes. About 50 megabytes, just because I'm just surfing or checking email.
Sure.
But every once in a while, I have a day where it goes up to like 500 megabytes, or maybe even a little bit more. And I was wondering, how can you tell which app is using all that data?
Well, we'll start with this. The go-to quote-unquote bandwidth monitor app, I'll just throw it out there, because most people aren't interested in a per application specific thing. Most people just want to keep a general idea. And for that, I tend to use IFTop, and that will, you can actually run scripts and stuff that will, and so some of our servers, we actually run scripts to have it send us, to keep track of bandwidth monitoring and stuff like that. If you want to get into per application, there's really only one tool I'm familiar with, and that is NetHogs. And NetHogs will show you bandwidth consumption per application that's running on the system.
Okay, will it show it to you in real time, or is it like only after the fact kind of thing?
Honestly, I'm not one of those people that monitors per application. My understanding is NetHogs runs real time, and then the way that you would go and look back if you wanted to do that is you would spit the output out to a log, and then you could go back and review the log. So you'd have the choice of how you want to interpret that information. Okay,
that sounds good to me. Thank you very much, Noah.
Thank you very much for the call. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Of course, you can email your questions to live@asknoahshow.com. We'd be happy to take your feedback, your questions that way. Lyle from Georgia. Welcome into the program, sir. Lyle, you're on the air. Good afternoon.
Hey, great. This is Lyle in Georgia. I'm a ham radio operator as well, and I'm thinking it'd be cool to have a monitor that showed a real-time weather radar with like a Raspberry Pi or something, or a mini PC. And how would you go about doing that so that it updated and stuff like that?
That is a great
question.
Sure, that is a great question. There is a program called Radar Tools. And I have played with it a little bit. Again, kind of like the last caller, it's not one of those things that I've really dug into. The reason I played with Radar Tools a little bit was back in college. I took a meteorology class, and as part of a meteorology class, I started getting involved with Skywarn for ham radio because I was a ham radio operator, and so going out and doing storm chasing. I'm sorry, I meant storm spotting. You can't call it chasing, even though you chase after a storm. As part of that, I started getting into monitoring weather and kind of keeping track of that, and so I had played with Radar Tools, and I'm not sure if that. It looks like I'm just doing a bit of Googling here on the air. It does appear that it is still a project that's out there, so I would check that out. I have no idea if they have an ARM binary available that you would be able to run on a Raspberry Pi or not,
or something like it.
Yeah, sure. I don't know of anything else out there. I've looked a couple of different times, and the issue I had with Radar Tools back when I last used it was they hadn't updated it. I noticed that it still is not receiving a lot of updates, but the site is still up, and it appears that the code is still available, and so it likely still works.
Well, there was, I'll give it a try, but like the local TV stations sometimes have the radar.
I tell you, let me give you another idea. As a guy who works for another media entity that we have live radar up, do you know what we use? You would think
What do y'all use?
you would think that we would have some sort of special system or some sort of software or whatever, but we don't. We actually use the National Weather Service. They have a live radar embed on their site, and that's what we have up on the screens. And like I said, you would think there would be some sort of more advanced or complicated or better solution out there, but that's actually, I can tell you, working for a media entity that monitors weather and gets paid to do it. That's what we're using.
That would look cool in your shack. One other thing that would look really cool in your shack is in GST they had this advertisement for this thing called Geochron, which is basically a flat world map with daylight and dark on it. It's $400. I'm like, that's a lot of money for just daylight and dark in a world map. You know, it updates and it scrolls. And I said, I bet there's some software that would do the same thing, but I haven't been able to find it.
Isn't Geocon available for us as a software package for Linux? I think they run it on a Pi, don't they? I am 99%. Yeah,
but it does 4K, so I wouldn't mind buying the software, but I hate to spend $400 for a mini. I'll have
a link for you in the show notes. It's k2gc.net, and there is a gentleman that has done this and has it working on a Raspberry Pi. And I'm just briefly looking through this. It appears that he doesn't actually. It's not actually Geochron. It's a different software that he wrote to be compatible with it. But he has a guide on how he got it working, and so I'll link this for you in the chat room. But it appears that you can get this running on a Raspberry Pi.
Oh, I'll have to get in the chat room. Noah, you answered both my questions.
Hey, we try. We aim to please around here, and the advice is worth what you pay for. Just keep that in mind.
Wait a minute. Hi. Thanks a lot, Noah. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great night. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Email live at AskNoahShow.com. Max joins us from Minnesota. Hey, Max, welcome into the program.
Hey, so my question is, I have a NAS and I have an NFS share on it that's going to be hosting my VM images. And I have a second server that I just got. And before, I would add the NFS share, and then in Vert Manager, just add that pool as a directory.
Sure. But
I'm doing that on both, and then when I want to migrate the VMs, it's not letting me. So I'm thinking I'm doing it wrong.
It's not. It's maybe not letting you because in order to migrate a VM, any storage resources have to be available for both of those hypervisors. So if you have a resource that's available in one and not available on another, it's not going to let you migrate. If I understand what you're asking me.
So basically I have added that NFS share to both VM hosts and then added them both as a directory, but it's saying it doesn't have like NFS mounts. So I'm wondering, do I have to add it through Vert Manager as a NetFS?
Let me back up for a second. Let me back up for a second. Here's where I would start. Let's start with this. What I would do is on your virtual host on the machine, add the NFS mount there as part of so it shows up as part of the file system on the host. Then inside of Vert Manager, instead of, I'm not sure exactly how you're going about trying to get that NFS share mounted inside of Vert Manager, but I wouldn't add it as an actual NFS mount inside of Vert Manager. What I would do is go under, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, inside of Vert Manager, you click on the actual host and then go up to the edit, and under the storage tab, add a storage pool and just choose, instead of, I assume that's where you're choosing like NetFS or excuse me, what'd you say you were using? NFS. Just choose file system directory, and then choose where that NFS mount is on the file system. And then that way, what'll happen is you will let you'll let fstab on the host system deal with connecting and mounting the file system, and all libvirt has to worry about then is mapping that directory to your host. So as far as your guest is going to, or excuse me, your guest. So as far as your guest is going to see, it's just another folder on the system.
And then I would be able, and then if I did that on 2 VM hosts, I would be able to migrate the guests between those two.
Yes. Let me do this. Let me check something real quick. Hey, Brandon in the mumble room, are you next to your computer, and is this advice sound?
Yeah. If you're starting to do something more complex, like when you want migration, I would start looking towards using something more like Over or Proxmox. Because if you want to do live migration, configuring that in libvirt is not exactly
trivial
for mere mortals. So
sure. Thank you very much for chiming in. I appreciate it. Brandon is our community resident expert when it comes to virtualizations. I lean on him when need be. Does that answer your question, Max?
Yeah, that works. That works great. Thank you.
Give that a shot. I think that will get you to where you need to be. That is the way that I run my virtual host. I map my NFS shares. All my storage is obviously being done on FreeNAS, and so the way that I'm mapping that is using NFS, and I'm doing that at the file system level and have not had any issues. But then again, I'm not live migrating from one host to another, so something to consider. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. That is how you join the program and add your voice to the conversation. Michael Tunnell, he is the owner and creator of Tux Digital. It is a Linux-based broadcasting network where he creates Linux and open source content. I've had the pleasure of working with Michael, for years. Now I'm working with Michael on a new project called Destination Linux, a podcast that he has been a part of for a number of years and has kind of taken the reins to turn into a newer, better, more updated product. It is the best Linux video podcast on the market today, and he joins us on the program. Hey, Michael, welcome into the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to be here. So, I guess let's start with this. What was the reason for the creation of Tux Digital?
Well, I just wanted to basically take the knowledge that I've gathered over the years for Linux and open source and share it with people. So that's pretty much the reason I started it. And I've always been interested in podcasting and creating media content. So I just kind of on a whim decided to start doing it, and then it turned into a channel and multiple podcasts and guest hosting on various other podcasts and all kinds of things. So it's turned out to be an interesting experience.
One of the things, I think everybody that does independent content does at least one thing very, very well, and then other things well too, but they always have one thing that I think they just own over everybody else. And I think the thing that you have that no other independent content creator out there has, actually, that no other content creator out there has, I'll go as far as to say that, you have a deep connection to the community. I never ever hear you say, I heard, or I saw, or I read. It's always, I was talking to, I was communicating with. We were doing a show just last week. We were recording Destination Linux on Sunday, and we were about to cover a story that was very prominent in the news, and we were a little bit late because you were communicating directly with the folks trying to get up-to-date information. And I think people don't really understand that and the benefit to your listening audience, and I guess viewing audience in your case, they don't understand the benefit to your viewing audience of you having that connection. So I just want to publicly thank you for continuing to do that work, because it requires an awful lot of time on your part and an awful lot of investment in your part to build and maintain those relationships.
Oh, yeah. I don't even think about that in that sense, because I've been involved in the community for almost 2 decades now. I don't exactly know when I started, but it was close to that. So I started when I was a teenager, and I just started talking to people regardless of what project they were on. Even if it was something I didn't use, I still wanted to get in touch with them, learn what they do on the project and that kind of thing. So I over the years developed a connection with a ton of different people. So like you were saying with the Destination Linux topic, I just wanted to talk to one of the developers of the project just to make sure that the things we were going to talk about in the show were up to date enough where we would be as I guess breaking news, I guess in a sense, because it would we'd have the straight to the source type of approach, and I never think about it as that being a benefit to it. It's just it totally is, but I never thought about it until you mentioned it. So
it's just second nature to you.
Kind of is.
I mean, creating content is a lot more work than a lot of people give it credit for. What are some of the challenges that you initially faced when you were getting Tux Digital off the ground?
Well, I mean, there's so many challenges for content creation, and I guess the biggest thing is trying to balance, work time and also doing work on the podcast itself as well, because a lot of people don't think about the fact that some people would associate doing a podcast as you just start talking on a microphone and then there you're done. But there's so much work that goes into it before and after, because a lot of people would also know about the editing aspect of it too. But I would say that the research that I do on my shows are more work in the research side than there is on any other part of it. Actually, you could probably say that I do more research more combined with everything else. So if I were to spend the amount of hours I spent on doing the podcast, I think each podcast is probably about 10 to 15 hours of work each week. And doing 2 podcasts adds a ton of stuff. So in a way, it's kind of like having multiple jobs and to be able to do this. So I guess the time barrier is the biggest issue, because I don't want to just make a product and just be, throw it out there and say that's good enough. I want it to be something that I would want to listen to, and to do that requires a lot of work on my part.
I was in an airport. I was getting ready to board a plane. I had just gotten done with a Linux conference and did not get a lot of sleep that weekend, and so I wasn't in the best of moods. And I was sitting in the airport terminal, and a gentleman approached me and said, "Hey, are you Noah?" "Hey, good to meet you." Sat down and started chatting with him, and the first thing he said to me, which I believe to this day he meant as a compliment, was, "Man, I just really wish I could do what you do. I really wish I could do an hour a show a week, and I wish that was my job." And I just kind of thought to myself, I thought, yeah, you know what? I wish that was my job too. I wish I could work for an hour a week too. It takes, for every hour that you hear on the air, just know that independent content creator is probably spending 3 to 5 hours researching, another 2 to 3 hours producing after the fact, and then another, I don't know, probably twice all of that time, maybe 6 to 12 hours promoting their show. So, in a given week, I'll probably put 20 to 30 hours into a 50-minute show.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's you can do, depending on how much you do, like, for example, my This Week in Linux is a news podcast, and I put anywhere between 15 to 20 topics on the show. And when I actually do the show, it totally comes the final product is about 40 to an hour long, 40 minutes to an hour. And the amount of time I spend on each topic on the show is anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes, or sometimes it's more, but that's the average. And you look at that, it doesn't seem like a lot of work, but the actual, just to even get all the stuff ready to do the show is so many hours. I can't even imagine. I've gone through it multiple times to streamline my process and to improve things, and it still takes a ton of time. So we're looking at at least 4 or 5 hours just to get ready to start recording. And then you got to look at the time, how long it takes to do the recording, plus the actual editing of the podcast. And there's ways to streamline stuff here and there, but overall it's still going to take a minimum of 10 hours, and the more commonly it's going to be up to 20 hours because of how much work you have to put into a podcast. And then when you start doing multiple podcasts, you're adding a ton of work to yourself.
Tell me about your involvement with Destination Linux. How did that get started? Tell me the story.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because it was just it was accidental, really. I was Rocco, or Big Daddy Linux, started Destination Linux with him and Rob, and they started the podcast, and I was a guest interviewed on episode 18 or 17 or something like that. I think it was 18, and we just talked about my journey into Linux and all that stuff. But around 6 months later, there was Rob decided to leave about a couple months after that, and Rocco was looking for a new host, and then he added Ryan to the new hosting, which made the show much more much different and more dynamic and stuff in that sense. And then later on, they wanted to add some more hosts to the show. And then one day, they just I was talking to Rocco and Ryan occasionally here and there before becoming a part of the show. And then one day, they asked me to guest host. And then they asked me to guest host the next week. And then they asked me to just keep hosting. And I was like, you know what? Sure, why not? Let's do it. And then later on, probably about 30 episodes after that, something like that, somewhere around there, Rocco decided to leave. And in doing so, he was doing the editing for the show. So he was doing all the editing, which meant that for the first 30 episodes of me on it, I didn't have to put as much, effort into it. And when he did decide to leave, it made it a situation where we didn't have an editor. And so I took the reins for the editing. So already spending 10 to 20 hours a week on one podcast, I was like, well, let's just add another 10 to 20 hours on it and do a completely new podcast.
So there's undoubtedly some people that are listening to this and they're going, this is Noah's idea of a podcast episode, is they're just going to sit there and brag on themselves for all the hard work they do for Linux. I promise you, we're about to bring this home. Thank you for letting me tread on your attention span, listener. I appreciate it. Michael, tell me about your extensive, exclusive Linux workflow, because you have actually developed... Well, let's start with this. Before we get to the stuff that you've developed, tell me about the tools that existed, the open source tools that existed that allowed you to begin editing and producing shows in Linux.
Well, the tools that I used for like 99% of the work I do involves Kdenlive for the editing, OBS for the recording and capture of the screen, and some editing in Audacity for the audio correction stuff. But there's also other tools that allow me to do other things, like MKV Merge is a really, or MKV Tool Nix is the name of the main package. But MKV Merge is what I use. And these types of software is what I use to produce the show, but I also use other things to like keep track of the things that I need to do. Like Joplin Notes is what I use to keep track of what, like, to do the tasks list I need to do for each show. But I think overall, Kdenlive and OBS are by far the most important pieces of the show, and without having both of those, I wouldn't be able to do the show.
I want to talk a little bit, not that it was originally on my talking point list, but I'm going to bring it up anyway because it was kind of exciting to me. I want to talk a little bit about Kodi. This is the first week that we've tried using Kodi.
Yeah.
And when I say Kodi, I'm not talking about the TV app. I'm talking about a different kind of Kodi, C-O-D-I. And essentially what it is would it be an accurate summation to say it's essentially a web version of Sublime Text?
In a way, yes. But the reason why it's awesome is it's C-O-D-I-M-D. Kodi MD, meaning MD for Markdown. It is a text-based, web-based editor. But what's really cool about it is that not only does it have Sublime shortcuts and features, it also has collaborative documentation editing. So you are able to do the source code together, and I've actually been testing it for a very long time. I've been using it to do This Week in Linux for many, many months, and occasionally Ryan or DOSGeek or Ryan from Destination Linux would help me do the show, and we would use something like Kodi MD to do it. So there's two different versions. There's a service called HackMD, and then there's a self-hosted version called Kodi MD. So if you didn't want to host it yourself, you could use HackMD. Whether if you do want to host it yourself, use Kodi MD. And they're both great, and they both do a majority of the same things. But Kodi MD has a lot of some more customization options, and you can make it look different, as in it has like a dark mode, whereas the regular one doesn't. But it is such a smooth experience that I've never had it like lose sync with the other person working on it. It's the fact that it has Sublime Text shortcut schemes is really cool. And for those who like Vim, you can switch the shortcut keys to Vim keys, and it will work. One person can use Sublime keys, the other person can use Vim keys, and they would still all work together. It's really good.
That's awesome, and I thoroughly enjoyed this experience. In fact, I got to a point where I'm going to switch all of the Asnoa stuff over to Kodi MD because I just like it. One of the things I've absolutely hated about working with any other podcast system, honestly, is I just hate Google Docs. I really, really dislike the tool. And that's not a oh, look at me, I have my nose in the air because I'm so high and mighty and I just don't let Google infringe on my privacy. It's not even any of that. It's just a terrible tool. It sucks.
Yeah.
I just don't.
And also, if you use a Firefox, it's like they make it the most painful thing possible. Because you're not allowed to copy and paste for some reason.
You have to understand, I only have 32 gigs of RAM. I can't run Chrome. So
that's a fair point.
So there's all of these open source tools that are out there, and of course they allowed you to get the job done and be able to produce videos and audio content daily on Linux. But then you actually went out on your own, and this is why I wanted to bring you on the program and pick your brain, because I think it's a job really well done, and I think it's very valuable to the next up and coming podcaster that wants to produce content. You have written some custom scripts that allow you to do some really, really innovative and creative things as far as automatically cutting up video and editing and producing content. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've done multiple different scripts for each podcast that I edit, because Destination Linux and This Week in Linux are recorded in very different methods, mainly because on This Week in Linux, it's just myself, so I can control it to like pinpoint accuracy of when I start topics and when I end them, etc. Whereas Destination Linux has 4 hosts, so it's a little bit more of a juggling effect to do that. So I have to do a different technique to streamline the podcast. But both of them I wanted to is streamline as much as possible. So to eliminate at least a couple hours off of the editing work, and I was able to do that with a variety of different methods. So there's a couple ways that I did it with OBS. There's ways that I did it with Kdenlive, and there's also some generator tools that I built to streamline some stuff. So first off, with OBS, the best thing about OBS is that you can do so much with it. You can do like a ridiculous amount of scenes and many sources. Like I've joked on the past on Destination Linux about this, where I have on average about 30 to 40 scenes per podcast in OBS.
I've said it on Destination Linux. I will say it on this show. I still claim that is ridiculous and that is unneeded and that is you need help.
Okay, that's fair, but I think I need it, so therefore I have them.
Nothing changes on Destination. It's the same exact shot, the whole show essentially.
Well, that's not true, because each episode the host order changes, and I need to cut the host cameras out, and also unfortunately. We use Zoom, but I think Zoom is great, but there's this one problem with Zoom is that you can't individually cut out each person. So I can't move anything around unless I were to, individually cut the order. So I have to do extra scenes because of that. And also there are things that I do that are not important at all, and you're right, but it bothers me. They're like this, like every once in a while on Zoom, there's this thing that says, has a green, like border around the person talking, and that bothers me. So I put the effort in to cut out each camera to get rid of that border and then resize it so it fits right on the screen. So you're right, that's totally a waste of time. But not necessarily a waste of time, because I don't like the border and it just looks bad. Right. So it made the show look better by doing it. But yeah, I could understand why people would just say that's
30 scenes are absurd. Right.
Right. So but on the This Week in Linux, I think there's probably 50.
That's fair. And This Week in Linux is obvious. That's a totally different. That's a different animal, and so I can kind of understand that a little bit more than I understand Destination Linux. But so one of the things, going back to OBS, one of the things that you've done is you worked with some developers to customize an extension to work on Linux so that you can mark in a file where an event happens.
Oh yeah. So this is a plugin for OBS called InfoWriter. And it's awesome. It's very powerful. It allows you to do control of like when you change things. So for example, if you have a bunch of scenes like I do, and you have a bunch of scenes on like for different topics like I do, you could switch to the topic, and then in a file, like a text file, it will write the name of the scene you switched to and when you did it in the recording. So it doesn't do it like based on timestamp of like of actual time. It does it based on how long you've been streaming or how long you've been recording. So, and if you are doing both, it will do the recording by default, or actually whichever one you pick first, but or whichever one is second is the one that it will automatically go to, but typically recording is the one it uses.
So in the biz, we call that an edit cut sheet, and it's being generated for you automatically, and it's not something that you have to do by hand. So to give everybody a little bit of perspective, everybody knows who Rakai is, or at least you should. He edited the show for years, and the way that Rakai dealt with an editing cut sheet was he watched the episode, and then he would sit there with a computer and pull out the times that he wanted that specific events occurred, and then he would use that editing cut sheet to make his final edit, and in the case of some of the other stuff Rikai was doing, submit reports to sponsors and stuff like that. And so you have automated that process because you don't have a Rikai.
Yes, exactly. I don't have a Rikai, so I have to do it myself. And the reason that this plugin is so great is because it does it on the fly in real time. So I have a special keyboard that I set up that has specific keys to do certain things. And one of the things it does is that it will write to the file in different little comments. So I have five comments that I send to the file, and whenever I need to start a topic or end a topic, that's what I can do.
That's absolutely awesome. And I again, a huge thank you for putting the work in and building the relationship, because I think, again, what people gloss over is the fact that you've worked with these developers to make this work on Linux. I happen to know for a fact that particular extension only worked on Windows, and then you worked with the community and the developers to bring it over to Linux.
That is correct. Unfortunately, the guy who made it did want to make it work for Linux, but he didn't know how to. So I did some testing to figure out how what the path needs to be and everything, and how to lay it out in OBS. And when I explained it to him how to do it, he decided to implement it into the actual feature, and then released a new version of it so that you could install it into OBS for Linux. So by default, I was like, when I first saw it, I was like, this is going to be amazing. Then it didn't work. So I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to make it work because I have to have this.
That's awesome. Now, after you get done with OBS, so you have your cut sheet, you obviously have the video, it's dealing all of the camera switching, it's dealing with all of the overlays and graphics. In fact, if you're not familiar, if you're new to the show, OBS is what we're using to generate the video content of the show, and is what gets posted to youtube.com/AskNoahShow. And it's capturing the chat and doing all of those overlays. A huge thanks to Michael and VisuX for designing all of the graphics for us. After that, you actually have some custom scripts that are going through and essentially doing some rudimentary editing for you.
Yes, this solves a lot of time. What I was typically doing was finding out when I edit each topic and find out where they are in the thing to do the cut sheet, and then that would take forever. But as soon as I created found the plugin and was created making it work for Linux, I was like, well, how far can I take this automation? If I can do it real time, can I do other things and make it a lot easier? So what I did was take the timestamps that's created in that file, and then I made a script that was able to automatically, depending on which one I'm doing, like Destination Linux and This Week in Linux do it in a different way. But the This Week in Linux, the way I structure it is that I have so much control. I can make sure that I have a couple seconds on the front and back of each topic, and then that goes into the text file. And then I take the timestamps from the text file and then put it in this script that I made, and it generates an auto-cutting system where it will take the beginning and end segment and then cut individual files for each topic automatically, regardless of how big the actual main file is. Typically, it's 3 hours long because I do the show on streaming live, and then between each topic, I also have a conversation with the chat room and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this show or on the stream. So I needed to make sure that I was able to cut it. And when I did it manually, that took forever. It was 35, 45 minutes just to cut those parts out. And now it takes, with this script, about 5 to 10 seconds.
Are these tools and custom scripts available to everybody, or is this a workflow that is a secret sauce of Tux Digital?
It's currently secret sauce because it's just a lot to customize, because I built it to use my path system and to use the method that I use. So you would have to have every piece, and right now I don't think it's ready to provide to publicly, because it would require me to customize it so it'd be more accessible to everybody else to implement it in ways that they would be doing a different podcast, because they'd have to build their podcast on OBS in the same way that I did, plus having the script stuff. But there are things that I will be providing in the future, and some of these, if not all of these, will be provided because there's I like doing that, but I want to make sure that when I do release them, they're not just full with errors that are specific to me that people can't use.
What does the future of Tux Digital look like? Obviously, if these tools become available, or if you can make these tools available, then people can follow you on Tux Digital and find that information. But where do you hope to be 1 year from now or 5 years from now?
Well, I mean, this is kind of a ridiculous statement, I guess, but I want to be the place for Linux content or open source content. Provide, and also be like a place where people can go to get help creating their own content. Maybe even there's an idea that I had that I plan to, at least sometime soon, create a structure where people can use my tools and my setup to create their own content, and I'll help them in a variety of different ways, kind of like a network of sorts. But overall, my goal is to be one of the main locations for just helping out Linux in general. So I don't know if it's how practical that is, but that would be the goal.
One of the things I want to point out, because I think it was, I guess it wasn't on this show, it was the interview, which by the way you should check out. If you don't usually follow Destination Linux, but you have an interest in the content that I make, maybe you feel a certain allegiance to have a monogamous podcast relationship with just me. The last episode we did of Destination Linux, we are doing a mini series of interviews of hosts, and the last episode that we did was of me. And I talked a little bit about my Linux journey and about how I arrived at my Linux destination. And one of the things that I think that episode exemplifies, we talked about it a little bit there, and I can touch on it a little bit here. The listeners of this show are listening and saying, hey, a lot of what Michael Tunnell at Tux Digital is doing sounds a lot like what Noah Chalaya is doing with the Ask Noah show and the affiliated content. Why is it that I'm having you on, and why are we having this conversation, and why is Tux Digital and Michael Tunnell so supportive of Noah Chalaya and Ask Noah? And I think the answer to that, and I hope this can be an example for others out there, we are both community members first and independent content creators second. And so if there's an opportunity for me to help you, or an opportunity for you to help me, that the fact that we are making similar content and doing similar things and have similar goals and ambitions has never ever stopped us from working together. In fact, I would argue it makes both of our brands, if you want to call it that, stronger.
Yeah, I mean, in ways it actually pulls us together, because if we weren't willing to collaborate, then we wouldn't be doing Destination Linux together.
Exactly.
So, like, that changed the whole dynamic of like I want to be providing a huge mountain of content for people, and you want to do the same thing. But there's the whole aspect of open source in general is the collaboration and community parts. So the phrase the tide raises all boats.
Yep.
Is that kind of structure. Yeah, exactly. So I want to help everybody. I want my content to be, valuable to people, but I also want to make, because I'm not going to be the best expert on every topic. Like, for example, you've done, tech support and IT services for so many years, where I haven't done that in like 15 years. So my experience is much, much, much lower than yours. So when we can do stuff together to, provide our best, our expertise for certain topics, that helps everyone.
Has dual booting allowed you to succeed
where
other?
Goodness, are you doing that here too? Wow.
The chat room has prompted me to bring up filthy dual booting. So just to be clear, Michael is not a dual booter. He doesn't do that. But there is a running joke. Chat room is freaking out. There is a running joke on Destination Linux that because Michael uses a VM like pretty much every other Linux user out there does to run some trivial Windows software every once in a while, all of a sudden that makes him a filthy dual booter. So I just wanted to find out if you felt that led to your success or did not lead to your success.
I think that hinders it for sure.
Okay, sounds good. Michael Tunnell, you can find him at tuxdigital.com. Absolutely fantastic content. If you want a weekly news show, check out This Week in Linux. Of course, you can catch Michael and I sometime throughout the week, depending on when Michael's tools decide to run and the episode gets released at Destination Linux.
Oh, actually, I'm editing the show right now for Destination Linux, so it's going to be on time this week.
Oh my gosh. And so the usual release day is Wednesday?
Yes, usually is Wednesday morning or so. I actually built a script, we've talked about this previously, but on my automation tools, I recently built a script specifically for Destination Linux that I haven't told you about, and I will be releasing that soon because of how it can be used for anybody. What basically it does is the same info writer timestamp stuff, except it takes the the timestamps and then converts them into Kdenlive guides. So that I don't actually, it doesn't, because there's certain times where I can't edit everything automatically, or like for Destination Linux, because it's so many different people talking on it. It takes the thing and it automatically adds the guide points where it needs to be edited for like the cut sheet directly in the editor. So when I actually go to edit, they're already there waiting for me to do it.
That's outstanding. And you said that will be released?
Yes, that will be released, because that one doesn't have any specific paths, because that one is it doesn't require like my structure system. As long as you want the edit points, it'll be able to do it. And the next version of Kdenlive is adding some more features of being able to like create priority for the guides. And when that releases, I'll be implementing that, so you can actually control like what type of edit in the guides they're going to be.
Michael Tunnell is his name. TuxDigital.com is the website. On Twitter, @Michael Tunnell. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the program and sharing your workflow with us and your contributions to the open source community. We'll get you back on the program real soon.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it, brother. 701, wrong show. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. We're late to the Linux Newswire newsroom with Eric, the IT guy. Here he is.
From the Linux Newswire studio, this is the Weekly Roundup with Eric, the IT guy.
Hey, Noah. Happy to be with you again, and here are your Linux and open source headlines. First up today, a chilling reminder to always be patching your systems. The Apache HTTP web server has been targeted in the past few weeks with what's been coined the Carpe Diem vulnerability. This vulnerability has been found, reported, and patched in version 2.4.39. Apache is responsible for providing web content for over 2 million sites at last poll, most of which are publicly accessible. The first vulnerability allows root access for any user allowed to write a script, be it PHP or CGI, for example. This vulnerability targets the log rotate process via an out-of-bounds array leading to an arbitrary function call. It has been dubbed Carpe Diem because it is CVE 2019-0211, Apache Root Privilege Escalation, or Carpe, and Diem because it is triggered once a day. The other vulnerabilities that were patched include fixing a race condition, allowing users to gain access to the Apache process in multi-threaded servers, and finally, Apache fixed a bug in mod SSL, which allowed malicious users to bypass SSL access controls. BleepingComputer.com has released an article this week exposing a disturbing trend in most of the popular browsers, the disabling of click tracking prevention. Many sites and providers today use HTML auditing to track users' click activity. This is done by adding a second call within any URL. For instance, if you navigate to mysite.com, the URL will direct the browser to that website. However, if hyperlink auditing is enabled, that link will also send a ping to a second URL that tracks activity. To date, most major browsers had an option to disable this ability. Several more privacy-focused browsers even had this behavior disabled by default. However, recent investigations have shown that Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and Apple Safari browsers in the next versions will no longer allow users to disable this behavior at all. This presents a huge concern for those privacy-minded users. There is some reassurance, however, as Mozilla's Firefox and the Brave browser will continue to ship this behavior as disabled by default. While some companies are working hard to violate the integrity of their users' privacy, there is some great news out this week for mobile devices. UBPorts has announced the formation of the UBPorts Foundation. UBPorts is a host project for Ubuntu Touch. In April of 2017, Canonical announced the cancellation of Unity 8, which promised to bring convergence between desktop and mobile closer to reality. The community very quickly stepped in and picked up the work. Since that time, great progress has been made in developing a viable alternative ROM not dependent upon any of the major tech companies. Their devices include the Nexus 5, OnePlus One, and support for many others. Their goals have been to defend the open source community, its users, and interests by developing the, quote, perfect personal phone operating system. The UBPorts Foundations will help further these efforts by creating legal, infrastructure, and funding sources not previously available. This is a big win for the mobile community who value security and privacy. You can go try out Ubuntu Touch today from their website, ubports.com. In another win for mobile devices, Purism has announced that private internet access is the very first OEM partner. PIA is a privacy-committed VPN provider with a proven track record of not keeping any logs for traffic routed through its platform. Purism, known for its security-minded laptops and the upcoming Librem 5 phone, provides toggle switches for radios and cameras on its devices. Now, with a partnership with PIA, we'll be offering bundled products with privacy at its core. The VPN will be offered on Pure OS out of the box alongside other tools like the Nitro Key developed Librem Key, Nextcloud, Matrix, and GPG signed TPM integration called Heads. Both CEOs announced great excitement to be working with companies that value open source, privacy, and the community in an age that seems to take privacy more and more for granted. For LinuxNewsWire.com, I am Eric the IT Guy. Now, Noah, back to you.
Thank you, Eric. Eric joins us every week to give us a roundup of your local, or your Linux news headlines, and we're happy to have him soon. This that will be an independent production. Will be available on your smart device of sorts, and you'll be able to get a daily brief. So that keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming soon. Suse has announced that they will soon be the largest independent Linux company. There's just one problem. They will not be the largest, and they won't necessarily be independent. So here's everything about the way this story is being reported. It has been frustrating to me, because the presupposition here, before you can get to any of the remaining facts, some of which are factually incorrect, but the assumption here is that Red Hat is somehow less valuable because they were purchased by IBM. And the truth is that couldn't be further from reality. This is a company that does not own any intellectual property. IBM did not purchase a $34 billion company. They purchased a $34 billion open source community. They purchased a community because they cared about the internal networking structure and the internal dynamics that existed in Red Hat and allowed them to grow to a company that is worth $34 billion. They don't own any intellectual rights. So I think there's a disconnect right off the bat comparing with the comparison here. But the speculation that I've seen from every community, and not just any one community, but in various different places, is meh, big deal, they're going to get sold again, because it seems like every time you turn around, Suse is getting sold. And so I guess this entire story and this entire narrative has been fairly frustrating to me this week. They're not truly an independent company. That Micro Focus sold to EQT, which is an investment aggregator of sorts, and so they still have a backing, as Red Hat has a backing, but there is this implication, or that Red Hat is going to be unduly influenced by IBM, that IBM is going to want to change something about Red Hat's culture. And I don't understand how we arrive at that conclusion, because the only thing IBM purchased was culture. Why would IBM want to change it? If anything, you want the people of Red Hat and the culture of Red Hat to begin to influence those that work at IBM, don't you? If you want to see more companies like Red Hat, and if you want to see more companies act like Red Hat, the answer is not to remove Red Hat from other companies. The answer is to get Red Hat involved in more companies like IBM. So I think that's right off the bat what I have a problem with. And then, like I said, they're not even truly technically independent. And if we make it 5 years or more, then we can go back and review and say, okay, Suse has made it, or maybe even longer than that. Okay, Suse has made it, and they have accomplished something here, because they're finally starting to build something. DOSGeek in the chat room says, Suse community will be sending Kernel Linux some colorful emails on this one. I'm sure they will. Here's the thing. I've gotten colorful emails because I am not a fan of Yast. I am not a fan of ButterFS. And I am a fan of OpenSUSE and Suse, the company, as it exists to further the Linux ecosystem. Because, and we had this discussion a little bit on Destination Linux, anytime one member of the community succeeds, the entire community succeeds, right? And we just talked about that with Michael Tunnell. But I'm not sure I understand the customer base of Suse, and maybe that's on me. That's probably my problem. Is I struggle to understand the market for Suse. Is there somebody out there that needs to use Suse that Red Hat or Ubuntu would not be a better fit or a fit at all? And maybe that person is out there, but for me, they always seem like Red Hat Mini. It always kind of feels like a Red Hat knockoff. And I apologize to anybody from Suse or OpenSUSE if that comes off offensive or unkind. But that's, from my perception, that's what I see as the market reality. And so when I see all of these articles kind of chastising Red Hat for being purchased by IBM, which has given them a huge advantage because now they have a massive checkbook behind them. They continue to be the largest open source company. They are the largest open source software acquisition in history. And somehow that's a bad thing, that an open source company has risen in prominence, has risen in pocketbook, and has risen in influence. And somehow, as an open source advocate, I'm supposed to be upset about that. And I don't understand that attitude. And so I guess I push back on it a little bit. But that happened, and so be aware of it, and we'll continue to watch it, and we'll continue to offer analysis, and I'll probably continue to get myself in trouble behind a microphone. The UBPorts Foundation is ready for launch. April 5th of 2017, the community took full responsibility for the development and maintenance of the Ubuntu Touch mobile operating system. Now, if you're not familiar with Ubuntu Touch, it is an alternative to Android or iOS that you can install on a phone and run Linux and a Linux distribution on your phone. UBPorts activities have continued to grow the community, and they're proud to announce that they have been granted the status of an official foundation from the authorities in Berlin. They've been working on this since 2017, and I like UBPorts. We've had UBPorts on the show many, many times, and I think they're an almost perfect operating system. I think there are just a couple little things that need some polish and need to be updated, and then of course there's the issue of the app infrastructure. But what I see, or what I foresee happening at some point, is in the same way that Snap packages universally packaged the Linux applications. I think there's a very real possibility that we're going to reach a point where mobile applications become containerized more so than they already are, because in some ways there is some container technology going on, but more so than they already are, and that may provide an opportunity for other alternative operating systems to pop up and be able to be utilized. As members of the board of directors, Jan Sprints and Ewald Perry took upon themselves the task of preparing the required documents for the foundation structure. They started laying out the usage of brands and names and logos and distinctive marks and worked with lawyers to get all of that done. One of the interesting things that, again, I think speaks to the collaborative effort of the open source community is the Document Foundation stepped up. And now you may know the Document Foundation as the folks that brought you LibreOffice. They were more than willing to help when asked and were able to provide some assistance to the UBPorts team. They also took on the responsibility for arranging the financial structure. They were meeting with banks and government organizations and foundations and accountants. It is a multi-tier approach that took years to complete, but the foundation that they have created now provides the project benefits such as more structure and new funding and merchandising opportunities. This is a big step for the UBPorts project. It allows the formal creation of an entity. It allows them to do things like enter into agreements, take donations, accept payments, make payments, make hires. And this is what's great about the open source community. Canonical developed an open source product and decided that they wanted to move on to bigger and better things. A few people in the community looked up and said, we think that's a valuable project. We would like to pick that up, pick up the torch, and carry it forward. And nothing stopped them. In fact, they've gotten a lot of support from those that were previously supporting what was Ubuntu Touch. And they continue to move the needle forward. Now, is it a perfect operating system? No. Is it a drop-in replacement for Android? And so your choices are iOS, Android, or UBPorts? No. It requires a certain level of geek, and it requires a certain level of managing your expectations. But if you're willing to do that, and the team is very upfront and honest about that. We've had Dalton Durst on the program. They're very open and honest about what their goals are, what their expectations are, and what the user expectation should be. And so we wish them all the best. Again, phone lines are open 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. You can add your voice to the conversation. Just a couple of minutes left in the program. I want to get to an email. This is less of a question, more of an open source conversation starter related to digital notebooks. I'm a huge OneNote user, and I've been using it for about 10 years. As you can imagine, I have quite a bit of information that I've collected. A little more than a year ago, I switched over to Debian for primary operating system, and it's been great with the exception of being forced to either access OneNote online or use a VM remote desktop. I also attempted to use Wine with no success. None of these are ideal. To add insult to injury, Microsoft has dropped the desktop edition of OneNote from Office 2019, focusing OneNote development under the universal app that only works on Windows 10. I have evaluated a number of alternative open source notebook apps, but there is no direct match. Cherry Tree is a container minus the accessibility and has been some recent conversations about converting OneNote to Cherry Tree. Zim is another processing option, essentially a local wiki with a GUI editor. Neither implement handwriting, but JournalXX looks to be a great tool for handwritten notes, sketches, and PDF editing. I'm generalizing here, but I think OneNote gets heavily used by those in tech and academia, where Microsoft runs the show, and is unfamiliar to those in open source realm. To use a food analogy, Windows folks often look for bread in the bakery of the supermarket, where open source folks don't mind baking their own from scratch. Do you have any thoughts, comments, or insights available on digital notebooks? Well, this is something that I've been struggling with for a couple of years, and what I landed on is Sublime Text. Now, the truth is, it doesn't have handwriting, it doesn't have image pasting, and so it misses a lot of the fundamental features that you need for an actual notebook. But you know what it does have? Markdown support. And what I found is, by embellishing my Markdown skills, I have been able to revamp the Altispeed website. I've been able to do show notes faster. So it's a universally translatable skill. And so if you can learn to notate in that, it might be an option to work for. Of course, we'll keep an eye out of other open source notebook alternatives that might be out there, and we'll continue to bring them to the show. If you have a suggestion, email them to live@asknoahshow.com. We'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. See you then, everybody.